Welcome to Let's Talk Death, conversations to inform and inspire. Let's Talk Death is a series of conversations with some amazing people from various fields. Our goal through these conversations is to normalize, educate, and demystify the taboo around death, dying, and the journey of grief. Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we are thrilled to be your hosts for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate the Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Scott Grossberg. After nearly 40 years as a high-profile trial attorney, Scott shifted his focus to helping people create what he calls fearless and sacred lifestyles. His mission is to guide individuals in reconnecting with their boundless confidence, creativity, love, and excitement. Drawing inspiration from various spiritual and shamanic traditions, Scott works as a coach, a trainer, and instructor. In addition to his coaching and consulting work, Scott is an author and content creator, focusing on topics such as life enrichment, mysticism, and divination. Scott's new book, The Unfinished Book, a journal for the end of the journey, is available now on Amazon. Scott, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Oh, thank you, Fran, and thank you, Andy. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for asking.
So, Scott, before we get into your book, I'm really curious, was there a personal event that perhaps changed the trajectory of your career path?
Now, the answer is yes, if we're talking about me as an attorney. The answer is yes, if we're talking about me as a magician. And I will tell you as an attorney, because that's what most people want to know, is why did you walk away from a nearly 40-year career doing what I did? And it was probably the death of my dad, going through that. And that was my first experience with a hospice worker up close and personal. And as my dad was actively dying, I've learned all these terms as an adult. You never get taught them as a kid. And she pulled me aside and she said, I want you to know your father is on a wonderful adventure. Now, not what I expected. I expected a caregiver, nursing staff, etc. It's like, here's the timeline. He's got this many days or hours or this. And she was very spiritual and very caring for me and my family as much as for my dad. And that gave me something that I worked very hard on this book to give, that I think everybody needs. And it's one thing. It's called perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, perspective's it's a big thing, right? Like depending
Absolutely.
on where you're right, where you're coming from. It's sort of the idea. Sometimes I'll talk to people and I'll say, you know, um, they'll struggle with this concept. Like, what do you mean a different perspective? And I'll kind of use like an illustration and say, if you have 5 windows in your house and they all face out different ways or have different things that you see out of them, depending on which one you look out, depends on kind of the perspective that you're bringing it. So there's that level of perspective. And then sometimes it's like this complete mind shift where to hear you say it, you weren't expecting her to say what she said. That was probably even a perspective shift right there,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk right now, by the way, in social media about reality shifting. And they're called shifters, and it's guided meditation and it's visualization and hypnosis and the like. But when you become very practical about life and death, you lose a father, right? Then I lost my stepmom. One of the big turning points, it wasn't in my career, Fran, but one of the big turning points in my life was when I was 13 years old. And my best friend was over at my house. He said, let's go get our other best friend, walked across the street. I'm in the front yard. And the next thing I heard was a loud bang. And it turned out he was shot in the chest because they had found the dad's gun and were going to play quick draw, not knowing the gun was loaded. I ran over to the house, 13 years old, ran over to the house. I do not remember going in the house. I was told I did, but I don't remember it. I do remember I remember Dennis's body being brought out and covered up. My dad is the one that had to go identify the body. I was pulled out of school, was not given any counseling. I was just like, take the time. And man, you learn grief up close and personal at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's a perspective shift, right?
Oh,
and nobody ever talked about it. And so, you know, all these life events happened. Yes, Fran, they were career changing, but they were also life changing. And it's, you know, if anybody gets anything out of today's podcast, I am now dedicated to helping people experience how precious life is on a daily basis. Not 6 months from now, not tomorrow, right now. Because, you know, I think from having been in the high power world of corporate and law and how fast can we move and how much money can you make, you know, the biggest myth I think we all tell ourselves is that we have time. And we don't. Yeah. You don't have time. And if you start living like that, maybe you do, right? I'm not asking anybody to be fatalistic. If people will start saying, what if at the end of the day I die, right? The whole Alan Watts concept of people should at least meditate on death. You know, what it would be like to fall asleep and never wake up, or what would it be like to wake up having never been asleep? You know, this very Buddhist and/or memento mori approach to living, those are perspective shifts.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I always say that the work that I do has taught me how to live life so differently. And Scott, I believe you've heard me say this more than once. It's taught me how to love more deeply, forgive more quickly, and to be as present as possible in the moment, because the next breath is not a guarantee. There is no guarantee that the next breath is going to happen. And to be constantly reminded of that and to live that, I find that I've learned to let go of the nonsensical stuff, to rid myself of the, what I call long anger. We're not perfect, I'm a human, but just refocusing and redirecting, which is very similar to what I believe you're saying.
Yeah, very much so. You know, it just real quickly, again, I'm sure the two of you already know this. I've been heavily influenced by Joan Halifax and her work with the 9 contemplations of Atisha, and, you know, just the whole impermanence concept.
Yeah. Tell us about the unfinished book, A Journal for the End of the Journey.
Oh, you know, I've written a number of books, and this one is my baby. I loved writing it. And
don't cover the hold it up.
Hold it up. There you go. I love this book because I didn't write it, and I'll explain this in a minute. May I give a quick backstory as to what this is?
Please.
I was overhearing my wife, it's a one-sided conversation, speak to someone on the phone, and she asked them, what is left unfinished in your life? I'll help you finish it. My entire world went, I can't even, you know, I think all of us periodically have those moments where the future changes, right? You know, it's one of those moments. I was touched so deeply, instantly brought to tears. I was going through my own personal death awareness. I had literally just gone through total knee replacement. So or I was about to have total knee replacement, sorry. And I thought it was a walk in the park. Scott, the type A personality, said, Go change the tire. I'll be back doing what I'm doing in 2 weeks. Honest to God, that's what I did. And then they stopped. They stopped 1 week before surgery, and the surgical nurse called and said, "I'm calling the surgery. We're not doing it." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because your EKG is abnormal. We've got to go and do all these stress tests, and we got to get a cardiologist." And it was like, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "I don't want you dying on the table." And you talk about personal death awareness for someone who was blowing it off up till then. It started with that. Then my wife said this comment to the person on the phone, and I, my whole life, have been somebody who felt like I was running out of time. My whole life. That's one of my earliest memories. It's why I'm an overachiever, right? And at that point, it was, there's so much stuff I haven't finished. I could die on the table. What is this? Right? Whether it happened or not, it was just the personal death awareness. And the night of my wife making that comment, I had the most lucid dream where I literally was simply taking in the download. And I woke up, it was so real. I woke up and the first thing I did was this book. What took so long were the illustrations in it. That was not the download, but the content and format was. And it was, I got to get this done. I got to get this done. And then they moved my surgery date up from having pushed it out. And it was like, I have to get this done because I might die. And it became manic, for lack of a better way to put it, to get this done. This book was finished so quickly and put out because I wanted my wife, among others, to have this memory, this legacy, right? And it's I will say this, I'm going to speak for my wife, it's been challenging for her to read this because she knows the context of it.
Wow.
And she knew that I put this together thinking I might die.
Yeah. Well, and it seemed to me that, talk about perspective, that perspective, you know, is, you know, I don't want to say creates the content, but it becomes a part of the content of the development, you know.
And I gotta say, here's two things I learned along the way on this little journey of putting the unfinished book together. And by the way, there's a reason it's all lowercase, because it's not finished yet. There are no page numbers on it because there's no order to this. You can use it in any way you want. And two things I learned very quickly. That is that I was not equipped to handle the emotional stress and strain of grief. And I know we're talking, you know, about death, but the reality is I had major surgery. I came out of that surgery and I fully admit I wound up with post-surgery depression, and nobody was equipped to deal with this. Nobody could. There was no one to talk to. You know, they wanted to give me more drugs. They wanted to help with the pain. They wanted to do this. And it's like, you don't understand. I'm grieving the loss of my knee. They amputated my knee and put a prosthetic in there. And, you know, this is total knee, not partial, not an arthroscopic surgery. It's like, this is not my knee. And I've been able to work through a bunch of that, ultimately with the surgeon, who was marvelous, who showed me, after the fact, showed me what they did. He actually let me hold the appliance. He let me make friends with it.
Yeah.
And it's been a very interesting journey, very powerful journey for me.
Yeah. You know, even hearing you talk, it makes me think about something that it's been on my mind, I'd say the last year or so, and I've actually utilized it in a number of different settings, you know, with some of the work that I do and some of the volunteers that I train and such. And it's not that I'm saying that you shouldn't have goals. I think goals are fine to have. I've just been focused a lot on what I just call our intentions. And so trying to get people to think about, and again, it's not fatalistic, but it's more thinking about, rather than just focusing on goals and where I'm going, the question becoming, what are going to be my inputs today? What am I going to put into whatever? And those are my intentions, and getting people to think about and focus more on the inputs, and then be open to receive whatever the outputs might be that,
Yeah.
that come back to you, rather than trying to produce outputs, if that makes any sense at all. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
For a long time, I've said we all need to pay more attention to our intentions.
Yeah.
And, in the Buddhist philosophy, any number of different people have talked about the root of all suffering is the attachment to outcomes. And so that was one of the reasons that this book, because I worked through it, putting it together, one of the reasons it's so powerful, I think, is that it allows you to get things out of your head and get the really meaningful onto the page. And that's cathartic, and that's healing, and that lets you face your own grief, right? And Fran and I've talked about this before. I think we're all grieving. I think maybe we've been grieving since we were born, right? And we don't understand what it is. We've been ill-equipped. No one talks to us about death. I certainly wasn't talked to as a kid. I was told, come to the funeral. I remember the first funeral I went to was my most loved uncle, and I was standing at the open casket, and all I could see was his nose above the casket. What am I supposed to do with that as a kid? I don't have enough coping mechanism, and I'm probably still grieving over that because I loved him so much. There are, even in my office today, there are memories of him in here. And I never got to say goodbye. I never got to do anything other than be the nice little kid that shows up and don't speak until you're spoken to.
Yeah, very, very true. I think about it as a child. I like to joke that I'm a recovering Southern Baptist. And and nothing against Southern Baptist. If you're a Southern Baptist, it's perfectly fine. I have lovely Southern Baptist friends, and that's fine. But for me as a child, I was terrified of death because I was constantly told all sorts of scary things. And so I remember just struggling with that myself.
What about the metaphors like, oh, they're in a better place? As a child, I too experienced the death loss of my favorite, dearest aunt. It was like, well, what do you mean she's in a better place? Let's go. Or, well, they went away.
Let's go see her.
Yeah, they went away. Well, where? Or we lost them. Well, let's find them. It's like, what do you do with this grief? Actually, it's a very dear friend of all of ours who explained to me, when explaining to a child, that death is where the body dies. The body stops working, which I thought was really a very interesting perspective and way of saying things as my child was growing up. Because you know how you say, oh my God, I'm so sick. Well, so-and-so was sick and they died. Well, now the child is fearful that, oh my God, mommy is so sick, she's going to die, interchanging that with the body stopped working. Now, when you say I'm sick or I'm not feeling well, it's not that the body, there's a different association with the body stopped working.
Yeah. And I will tell you again, as I put the book together, it was always designed for people who knew or thought they were going to die. That was the original concept. What I've learned is that people who are grieving other people are finding solace in this. And again, I don't know if you've ever done any of shows yet on journaling for the elderly, journaling for hospice, journaling for grief. There's something so comforting about having that pen to paper. That again, I look back in my life, the tools, boy, I wish I'd had something like this when the hospice nurse talked about the adventure that my dad was on, and looking at it through that perspective. And he couldn't have done the journal while he was actively dying. He had cancer, and was out of it a lot of the time. But I could have. I could have written down what I was feeling, what I was terrified of, what I, wanted, how I want him to be remembered, how I want to be remembered. And I think it takes that very cathartic approach that for a caregiver is what I've been told, that a caregiver, they don't have workbooks. I was shocked, by the way, when I went and looked up before I ever published the book. I went and looked up death journals. Well, you get these wonderful little diaries of here's where my will is and here's where my papers are kept. And it's like, and while there certainly are books that can be repurposed for this, I never saw anything that just said, hey, look, here's a journal for the end of your journey.
Yeah.
Let's just call it what it is.
Scott, before Andy looks at the time, can you give us a few examples of the pages or the questions or the thought-provoking ideas in the book?
Sure. So, one of the things that's my favorite, that I don't know that everybody else's favorite, and it came out of the conversation with the hospice nurse. And there's a page on here that lets you fill in the dreams I will have. These are the adventures and wild imaginations my brain has in store for me. My dad was telling all kinds of stuff that he was experiencing, from going back on the farm to whatever. It's like, goes, Andy, to you. What intention do you want as you're going through the dying process? What do you want to be thinking about? There are places in here how to write down how I've loved well, how I've lived well. Most importantly, who do I want to pardon? And there's a great line, who I need to unleash the kraken of forgiveness on.
Wow.
Hitting the reset button. This is where I admit fault and ask for a do-over, right? We've all made mistakes. And then there's spaces in here for you to write down just free-form stuff. One of the fun ones that my sister working through the book actually liked was, I never found the answers to these, right? The unsolved mysteries that still keep me up at night. And then most importantly, there's stuff in here, how you can celebrate me. Here's the magic of memories that I want to live on forever. What kind of music do I love? So that maybe the loved ones can play that as you're going through the dying process or at your celebration of life. And it's a variety of things, with ultimately, I think that the most powerful, it's a picture of there's a cage in the background, an open cage. And you write on it, it's, I don't need to answer to anyone. These are my plans for some last acts of rebellion. Right? It's like, as we go through whatever phase of life we're going through, I'm always reminded of that little cartoon of the mouse flipping off the giant hawk that's coming at them, and it's the last great act of defiance. There's still part of me in there that I would love people to just have that little fire in their belly, even as they reach an end of a phase.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Love it. Well, we are indeed out of time. This has been a great conversation. Time always flies when we're sharing with one another. But before we get out of here, I did want to make sure that you have an opportunity to share with our listeners how they can connect with you, with your work, and make that connection.
Oh, thank you for that. The easiest way to find me and all my books and works that I do is on my website, Thinking, THINKING, magically, and .com. And the book is on there, and social media connections, just the easiest, quickest way to get there. You can find the book on Amazon right now, and it's about to be released at Barnes & Noble as well.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Amazing. Scott, thank you so much for being our guest here at Let's Talk Death and for sharing the inspiration behind your book.
Oh, thank you both for letting me come on and talk with you. I love conversations like this because I think it moves the world closer to a better place.
Agreed. And so we also want to thank those who are joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all of our programs and resources of Heal Grief, including our national network of support for grieving young adults called Actively Moving Forward.
And if you know of a bereaved adult, refer them to our AMF app, where adults of all ages connect with others experiencing a similar death loss. And last, make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
So again, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Death.